My dad humiliated me in front of everyone. My calm reply left the whole room silent. I had a system for surviving the semi-annual gathering at Calvary Baptist's Fellowship Hall. I arrived 12 minutes after the posted start time, which meant the seating had already sorted itself, and I could take the chair nearest the side exit without anyone reading meaning into it. I kept a cup of sweet tea in my hand as a prop, something to look at, to sip, to set down when I needed to move. I made brief eye contact with people. I smiled at the right intervals. I had been doing this for 9 years, ever since I was 23 and too proud to stop coming entirely, and I had reduced the whole performance to a kind of maintenance. Low effort, low exposure, minimal damage. The hall smelled the way it always did, lemon furniture polish, and the industrial coffee they brewed in the kitchen's 30-cup urn, and underneath it the particular warmth of 50 people in a room designed for 40. My father was holding court near the long tables where the casseroles were arranged, which was where he always positioned himself. Gerald Woods did not wait for attention to come to him. He manufactured the geometry of a room so that attention was structurally inevitable. I had watched him do it my whole life. He angled himself just so, projected his voice just enough to carry across 2 conversations without raising it, and smiled with the specific warmth of a man who was performing warmth convincingly. Half the neighborhood board members were laughing at something he had said. 3 of the deacons had drifted toward him. My brother Brandon stood at his shoulder like punctuation at the end of a sentence. I stayed near my exit. For 40 minutes it held. I spoke to Aunt Renee, who gave me a hug with slightly too much pressure, and asked about my work in the way people ask about work when they consider it beneath notice. I said the consulting was steady. She nodded with that particular smile that means the conversation has reached its ceiling, and she is already cataloging what she will report to my father later. I refilled my tea. I checked my phone once briefly and put it away. It was the board member Clifton Hurst who broke the equilibrium. He mentioned, to nobody in particular, that the Lowcountry Legacy Foundation had just announced a new round of community grants, and weren't they doing remarkable work for the neighborhood? My father heard it from across the room the way he heard everything. His head turned with the unhurried precision of something predatory and patient, and his gaze found me the way it always eventually found me, with a kind of casual satisfaction. "Jenny," he said, and the room gave him the quarter-second of attention it always gave him. "Clifton here is talking about the Legacy Foundation. That's that community thing you do some computer work for, isn't it?" There was no hostility in his voice. There never was. Gerald Woods had not raised his voice at me in 15 years. He had, over that same period, described me to neighbors as scattered. He had explained my purchasing of a cash-paid BMW 7 Series as evidence of poor financial planning and likely debt. He had told my aunt on a recorded phone call, she had not known I could see her message history, that he worried Jenny had never quite developed the judgment the real world required. He had done all of it with concern in his voice. The way a physician delivers a diagnosis he has been reluctant to share. "I do some work with them," I said. My voice was even. Right. He turned back to Clifton with a small, collegial nod. "You know, I used to worry that girl would find her footing someday. I genuinely did. She had ambitions when she was young that were, well." He smiled the way men smile when they are about to say something unkind with maximum social cover. "Let's just say the real world has a way of calibrating a person. I'm glad she found something she could manage." The room did not go fully silent. Rooms rarely do. But there was a particular rearrangement of the ambient noise. Conversations that had been flowing encountered a small resistance, and in that resistance, I could feel 50 people processing whether to acknowledge what had just happened. Some looked at their shoes. Clifton developed a sudden interest in the casserole nearest his elbow. I set my cup down on the folding table beside me. It made a small, clean sound against the plastic surface. "Okay," I said. That was all. 2 syllables, nothing in my face, nothing in my posture that suggested I was leaving under duress or triumph or any particular feeling at all. I picked up my car keys from my jacket pocket and walked to the side door, which I had chosen 9 years ago precisely for this kind of exit, and I pushed through it into the thin October air without looking back at my father, my brother, the board members, or any of it. The BMW was parked at the far end of the lot, under a live oak that dropped small leaves on the hood in a way I had always found either annoying or peaceful depending on the day. I sat in it for a moment with the engine off. Then I drove home. My apartment was on the fourth floor of a building on East Bay Street, with a view of the waterfront that I had specifically selected and had never described to my family. The building had a rooftop my father did not know about, a concierge named Marcus who remembered that I took my coffee without anything in it, and a basement security suite operated by Nate Calloway, who had been the building's chief of security for 6 years, and whom I had helped quietly keep his daughter's medical bills from destroying his family during a period when he had been too proud to ask anyone for help and too honest to pretend he wasn't drowning. Nate had never mentioned it to me again after I handled it. I had never asked him to. I was reading on my couch at 11:40 when a text arrived from my Uncle Ray, who was my father's brother and a gentler man than his sibling, and who had the particular loyalty of someone who spent his whole life watching someone else cause damage and never quite finding the right moment to name it. The text said, "Thought you should know. Gerald made some calls after you left." I read it twice. Then I put the phone face down on the cushion and sat with the information for the length of time it took me to understand what shape it was. The call came at 12:15. It was from a woman named Cheryl on the community board, a woman I had met twice and who spoke to me with the slightly elevated formality of someone reading from a script. She told me that the Lowcountry Legacy Foundation had received an official incident report from a Mr. Gerald Woods concerning what he described as erratic and threatening conduct at that evening's gathering, and that per their operating procedures, I was being placed on a temporary suspension from all volunteer activities pending review. She apologized for the inconvenience. I thanked her. I hung up. At 12:47, an email arrived from Derek Pruitt, titled with the Foundation's letterhead, informing me that my consulting credentials had been suspended as a precautionary measure, while the board investigated recent concerns about professional conduct. Derek was on the Foundation's board of directors. He had been on it for 18 months, long enough to have mapped the political geography of the organization and identified who could be pressured and who could not. He had been pushing for budget authority over the grant allocation for 2 quarters. He was the kind of man who watched for falling trees and made sure to be standing in the right position when they came down. Aunt Renee called at 1:30 in the morning. She spoke in her concerned voice, which was the voice she used when she was gathering information under the cover of sympathy, and she told me that Gerald had been on the phone with Derek Pruitt for 45 minutes that afternoon. "I'm just worried, sweetheart," she said. "You know your father only ever does things out of love." I told her I appreciated the call. I went to bed. The Foundation's offices occupied the 4th and 5th floors of a building on Meeting Street that I had, through Coastal Horizon Holdings, LLC, owned for 3 years. The reception desk was staffed by a woman named Patricia who greeted me the next morning with an expression that told me she had been briefed on the situation and was deeply uncomfortable about it. I smiled at her. I took the elevator. Simone Ellis had her office on the 4th floor. She was the project associate I had worked most closely with for 2 years, a woman of genuine competence and some genuine ambition. And when I knocked on her doorframe and she looked up, something moved across her face that I recognized as the expression of a person who has already made a decision and is hopping not to be asked to defend it. "Jenny," she stood, which was unnecessary. "I heard about the suspension. I need the community development files," I said. "The ones from the first phase." She was quiet for a moment. "Derek has asked that all project files remain in the central system for now." "I see." "I'm not trying to," she stopped, rearranged. "I don't have a lot of room here, Jenny." "I know," I said, and I did. I didn't hold it against her exactly. Fear is a kind of information. I ran into Derek in the hallway outside the conference room. He was carrying a binder and wearing the expression of a man who has been waiting for this particular hallway for a long time. He told me that my access badge would be deactivated as of noon, and that I should feel free to collect any personal items from the shared workspace. He said all of this with the clipped professional courtesy of someone whose legal team had pre-approved the language. He did not ask how I was. I told him I hoped the rest of his day was productive. I took the stairs. The dining room at the Palmetto Club on Broad Street was close enough to empty at 2 in the afternoon that Lena Zhao and I had the corner table and its view of the street entirely to ourselves. Lena ordered sparkling water and the wedge salad and did not look at the menu because she already knew everything on it. She had been my attorney for 7 years and my closest friend for 6 of them, and she had the particular quality I most valued in another person, which was that she could sit with a complicated situation and think in it without needing to fill the silence. I told her everything. She asked 4 questions, none of them about how I was feeling. She made 2 notes on her legal pad. "Derek can't fire you," she said. "No," I said. "And Gerald doesn't know about Coastal Horizon." "No one in the family does." She nodded. She turned her pen once between her fingers, which was the only physical tell she had when she was mapping something. "The incident report is actionable. If there's footage from the fellowship hall." "There won't be. It's a church." "Then we need the meeting footage." She looked at me steadily. "The holding company documentation is clean." "Immaculate," I said. That night I texted Nate Calloway. His response was one word: "Tonight." The basement security room was cooler than the rest of the building and smelled of electronics and old coffee, and Nate had the footage queued to the relevant timestamp before I arrived. He did not ask me to explain the context. He sat back in his chair with his arms folded and his face carrying the particular neutrality of an ex-military man who has witnessed situations more complicated than this one and retains the habit of not editorializing. I watched myself on the screen, setting down the cup, saying my 2 syllables, walking to the exit. The timestamp read 8:47 p.m. I had been calm. Even through a security camera with flat institutional lighting, I had been recognizably, documentably calm. My father hadn't even watched me leave. He was already turned back toward Clifton Hurst. Then at 8:51, Brandon crossed the room. He moved with purpose, not urgency. He found our father near the window that looked out on the parking lot. The footage had sound. The hall had a security audio system I had not been aware of, which Nate noted with the quiet satisfaction of a man who keeps good records. The quality was imperfect, but the words were clear enough. It was Brandon who brought the plan, not my father, my brother. Brandon who said we can use the word unstable. I've heard they've had other situations. Brandon who said you file it tonight before she files anything. It goes on official record. My father who listened, and then nodded slowly and said, you're right, we should have done this years ago." Lena, seated beside me, did not change her expression. She made a note. "Time-stamped," she said. "Time-stamped," I confirmed. Nate had it transferred to a secure server within 45 minutes. I gave him a copy of the encrypted file. He said good night and went back to watching his monitors. I met my father and brother at a diner off Rutledge Avenue the following morning, the kind of place that serves breakfast all day and where nobody knows anyone, and the booths are deep enough to have a conversation without it carrying. I arrived first. I ordered coffee. I did not open my phone. Gerald came in ahead of Brandon by 30 seconds, which was how he always entered rooms. He looked well. He always looked well. He slid into the booth across from me with the ease of a man who is confident in the power of the space he occupies, and he said, "I hope you're rested," in the tone of a man who has already decided how this conversation ends. Brandon sat. He ordered nothing. He looked at me with something that I had to think carefully about before I named it, and when I named it envy, which is not the same as hatred and is in some ways harder to look at. I told them what I had. Not everything, not the structure of the holding company, not the full scope of what Lena had prepared. Just the footage, just the timestamp, just the words unstable and file it tonight and we should have done this years ago, repeated back to them in the same even register I used for everything. My father did not panic. He was too skilled for panic. He shifted. I watched the shift, the slight recalibration behind his eyes, and then he said, with the careful warmth of a man who has been managing situations like this one for 40 years, "Jenny, sweetheart, you've always had a tendency to misread things." Brandon said I should consider the leave of absence that Derek had outlined. He said it would protect my reputation. He used the word protect. Something inside me that I had not known was still engaged and disengaged cleanly in that moment, the way a latch releases. It did not feel like heartbreak. It felt like finally acknowledging a structural failure that had been there for a very long time. I paid for the coffee. I did not say goodbye. I walked out into the morning air, which was cool and salt-edged from the harbor, and I stood beside my car for a moment before I got in. The emergency board meeting was called for Thursday at 10. I received the notice informing me I was not to attend. I arrived 10 minutes early. Derek was already at the head of the table. Gerald and Brandon had positioned themselves in chairs along the wall, observer status, the arrangement of men who expected to watch a conclusion they helped engineer. 3 of the board members looked uncomfortable. Patricia from reception had placed a carafe of water at the center of the table, with the quiet competence of someone who understood that whatever was about to happen was going to happen regardless of the water. Howard Tillman arrived at 10:05. Howard was the CEO of the Foundation's Public Trust and one of the 12 people who knew that Coastal Horizon Holdings was not a dormant investment vehicle. He set his briefcase on the table with the unhurried movement of a man who has already won. Lena arrived 20 seconds behind him and placed a bound document in front of Derek without looking at him. Derek opened it. He read the first page. Then he read it again. The room had gone the kind of quiet that is not comfortable. I pulled my laptop from my bag and connected it to the conference room's display. The footage ran in full 8 minutes and 43 seconds, clear audio, clear timestamp. My exit. The empty room. Brandon crossing toward my father. The plan, spoken plainly in my brother's voice, followed by my father's quiet agreement. The board watched it without speaking. When it finished, I looked at Derek Pruitt. "Your interim appointment is terminated effective today," I said. "Howard will manage the transition." Derek said very quietly, "You can't." "The holding company documentation is in the binder in front of you," Lena said. "Pages 11 through 15. I turned toward my father and Brandon, who were still in their chairs against the wall. I did not address them. I looked at Nate, who was standing near the door in the capacity of building security, which was his actual job. "Please escort these 2 gentlemen out," I said. Nate did not look at them when he said, "Gentlemen," and gestured toward the door. My father stood with dignity, because Gerald Woods would always stand with dignity. It was the only register he had. Brandon stood more slowly. He looked at me once, and I let him look, and I did not give him anything to read in my face because there was nothing there to read. They left. The weeks that followed had their own architecture. Brandon's employer, a commercial real estate firm on King Street, received what I can only describe as a thorough account of the board footage through channels I was not directly responsible for, which was accurate in the precise sense that I had not made a single phone call. His contract was not renewed. He relocated, I was told, to Atlanta. I did not call him. The town hall meeting in the 4th Ward was a monthly event that Gerald had attended for years in the capacity of a man invested in the civic good. It was at the October meeting that Patrick Drury stood up during the public comments portion, and in a measured and specific and devastatingly documented 12-minute account, described what my father had done to his family 11 years ago over a property line dispute that Gerald had fabricated. Patrick had records. He had his own legal counsel. He had, it turned out, been waiting for a moment when the community's perception of Gerald Woods had developed enough existing cracks that his account could land rather than shatter. The narrative around my father did not collapse dramatically. It eroded. Quietly, in the way that all real damage accretes, one conversation at a time, one deacon reconsidering, one board member comparing notes, Aunt Renee's allegiance shifting to the side that was winning with the same smooth motion she had always used to shift in the other direction. The Foundation's annual gala was held at the Francis Marion Hotel in November. The grand ballroom had been prepared with the restraint I had specified through 3 intermediaries: white linens, low arrangements, the lighting that made a room feel like it was being seen at its best. Howard introduced me from the podium, as the founder of the Low Country Legacy Foundation and the anonymous benefactor behind 9 years of community development funding. The applause was genuine, in the particular way that applause is genuine when it contains some surprise. I saw my father in the corridor outside the ballroom near the end of the evening. He was alone, wearing a name badge that did not have his name on it, standing near a column as though observing something that was no longer within his reach. He saw me see him. I looked at him. He was a man of 64 in a good suit who had spent 40 years building an architecture of control that had now, at some structural level, failed. He looked older than I remembered from the diner. He looked, for possibly the first time, like someone who understood something about consequence. I looked at him the way you look at something that was once very important and is now simply there. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with the mild, clear perception of a woman who has somewhere else to be. I turned and walked back into the room. I drove home along East Bay with the windows down, which I knew was too cold for November in Charleston, and did it anyway. The harbor was black, and the bridge lights laid themselves across it in long reflections, and the city moved past me the way it always moved past me, indifferent and familiar and entirely mine. I had built something real. I had built it quietly, over a long time, with my own discipline and my own judgment, in rooms no one in my family had known to look for. The lie had not touched it. I parked in my building's garage and sat for a moment with the engine ticking down in the cooling air. The gala badge was still on my lapel. I unclipped it and set it on the passenger seat and looked at my name on it for a second, Jenny Woods, founder, and then I got out of the car and took the elevator up to my apartment and opened all the windows that faced the water and stood there in the dark with the cold air coming through and the sounds of the city rising up from below. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vindicated in the way stories always promise vindication will feel. I felt the particular quiet of a woman who has nothing left to prove to anyone, and who finds, standing in that silence, that it is exactly enough.